When my son invited me to live with him and his wife, I thought it was a blessing, a second chance to be close to family. But at their housewarming, while I served drinks from the kitchen, I overheard his wife laughing. "She thinks she's family, she's just free childcare with a pulse." My son chuckled. That moment shattered everything. I didn't argue. I smiled, wiped my hands, and quietly made one call. The next morning, their credit cards stopped working. They had no idea that the woman they mocked still owned the very house they stood in. Margaret had always believed that if you gave love without conditions, it would find its way back. At 65, she lived alone in a modest second-floor apartment with yellowing wallpaper and a leaky faucet that sang its own tune every night. It was quiet but not sad. After decades as a piano teacher, she'd grown used to silence, filling it with Chopin and tea. Her son, David, had been the light of her life. She'd raised him alone after her husband passed when David was just 9. She remembered working double shifts, then walking home in the snow just to make his favorite stew. Every birthday, every school concert, Margaret was always there, clapping the loudest. David had grown into a man any mother would be proud of. A software engineer, articulate, handsome, with an air of calm confidence. He met Stephanie at a tech conference. She was sharp, worked in finance, and always wore perfect lipstick. Margaret tried to like her. On Stephanie's birthday, Margaret picked up the phone, heart fluttering like a schoolgirl's. She dialed. "Hi, Stephanie. Happy birthday, dear. I was wondering if you'd like to come by for dinner tonight. I made your favorite—" There was a pause, a sigh. "Margaret, that's sweet, but we're going out with friends. Rain check? Oh, of course. I just wanted to— Never mind. Have a lovely evening, dear." She hung up, staring at the empty dining table she'd already set for 3. Still, she smiled. It wasn't a big deal. Young people were busy. Later that night, she scrolled through her phone and saw Stephanie's Instagram story, a rooftop dinner, a cake that read, "To the most amazing woman ever," surrounded by candles and friends. David sat beside her laughing, glass raised. No mention of his mother. Still, Margaret didn't cry. Instead, she opened a wooden box under her bed. Inside were old photographs. David in a graduation robe, David blowing out candles on his 6th birthday, David hugging her in front of their old red brick house. She touched the edge of one photo, her smile faint but present. "He's happy," she whispered. "That's what matters." Weeks later, David called with news. "Mom, Steph and I have been talking. We think it'd be nice if you moved in with us." Margaret blinked. "What, really?" "Yeah, you're alone too much, and the house has space. Think of it as family time." Tears welled in her eyes. "David, that's the sweetest thing anyone said to me in years." She sold her old upright piano, gave away her plants to neighbors, and packed her life into 6 boxes. Moving day came, and David greeted her at the curb with a half smile and a distracted hug. Stephanie didn't come out to help. She stood at the doorway, texting. Inside, the house was modern, steel and marble, cold to the touch. David pointed upstairs. "We cleared the attic for you. It's cozy." The attic, with slanted ceilings and a single window facing a brick wall, but Margaret nodded. "It's perfect, dear. Thank you." She spent the first night on a thin mattress, listening to pipes groan behind the walls. The next morning, she went downstairs to make tea. Stephanie stood at the counter. "Morning," Margaret said. Stephanie didn't look up. "Quick note, Margaret, the kitchen's pretty small and we're meal prepping this week. Just easier if it's off limits after 8 p.m., okay?" Margaret blinked. "Oh, I just wanted to make tea. There's a kettle in your room now. Should work fine." Later, David handed her a list. Pick up groceries, pick up Ben from school, their son, vacuum the hallway. "Just stuff you said you didn't mind helping with," he said. She nodded. Of course she didn't mind. Family helped family. One afternoon, Margaret opened the cabinet in her room and noticed dog hair on the shelves, a faint odor. Confused, she looked through old photos on the wall. There, in the exact same room, was a golden retriever curled on a dog bed. Stephanie walked by and saw her looking. That used to be Max's room. Our dog died last year. Oh, Margaret said softly. He must have been well loved. Stephanie smiled thinly. We haven't changed much. Figured it worked well for him. Margaret didn't say anything, but that night when she closed the door, the room felt colder. Still, she told herself, they're just adjusting. Maybe I'm overthinking. Maybe they really want me here. She clutched an old pillow, the same one she used to sleep with when David was a baby, and whispered into the dark, "You're home now. Don't mess it up." The invitation came casually over breakfast. David stirred his coffee while scrolling through his phone. "We're having a housewarming this Saturday. Just a few friends. You'll be here, right?" Margaret smiled. "Of course." "Should I make something? That lemon bundt cake you like?" David shrugged. "Sure, that'd be nice." Stephanie didn't say anything. She was already dressed, phone in hand, heels clicking as she walked out the door. "We're ordering catering, but yeah, a cake's fine," she said over her shoulder. Margaret spent the next day preparing the cake. She polished her shoes, ironed her best blouse, and even found the pearl earrings David gave her years ago. She imagined mingling with the guests, talking about her son's achievements, maybe even sharing stories of when he was little. Saturday came. Guests arrived in waves, laughter and perfume filling the air. Margaret stood near the entryway, holding her cake, waiting for someone, anyone, to introduce her. But no one did. Stephanie walked past her, beaming. "Everyone, drinks are on the deck. Help yourselves." Margaret set the cake down on the kitchen counter and began helping where she could. She offered to refill the lemonade jug, fetch napkins, wipe the counter. No one noticed. No one asked who she was. At one point, a young woman with long blonde hair turned to Stephanie. "Who's the lady in the kitchen? Caterer?" Stephanie laughed, not bothering to lower her voice. "Oh, that's David's mom. She lives here now. Free cleaner, free nanny, free rent. Best investment ever." Margaret had just stepped into the hallway to bring more cups from the pantry. The words hit like a slap. Her hands trembled, plastic tumblers clattering to the floor. She didn't bend to pick them up. David's laugh joined Stephanie's, a quiet chuckle, barely a breath. But it was enough. Margaret stood frozen for a moment, then slowly backed into the shadows of the hallway. Her chest tightened. She clutched the edge of the wall to steady herself. For the rest of the evening, she floated like a ghost, smiling politely when someone brushed past her, nodding silently when David asked her to check on the ice. No one thanked her for the cake. When the last guest left, Margaret walked upstairs quietly, her legs heavy. She closed the attic door behind her and sat on the edge of the bed. The house was quiet again, but the silence no longer felt familiar. It felt suffocating. She opened the drawer beside her bed and pulled out an old photo frame, her wedding day. Her husband, Robert, stood beside her, tall, proud, and warm-eyed. She whispered, "If you were here, he wouldn't dare." Her fingers ran along the cracked glass. A tear landed on the frame, then another. By morning, Margaret had barely slept. Her eyes were puffy, but she got up, made tea in the electric kettle Stephanie had so thoughtfully provided, and went downstairs to find breakfast for Ben, their 6-year-old. She found a sheet of paper taped to her door. Typed, not handwritten. Weekly chores: Monday, laundry; Tuesday, grocery run; Wednesday, clean bathrooms; Thursday, pick up Ben; Friday, vacuum and mop. At the bottom, please stick to this. Helps us all stay organized. Steph. Margaret stood there holding the list, staring at the bold font like it might soften if she blinked enough. Later that afternoon, she found David in the living room. "David, about this." She held up the list. "I don't mind helping, you know that, but this feels formal, like a job." David didn't look up from his laptop. "Steph's just trying to make things easier for everyone. Don't take it personally." "I just want to help his family, not be assigned like staff." David sighed. "Mom, please. Don't make this into drama. You're reading too much into it." Margaret walked away without another word. That evening, she went to check the mailbox. She hadn't looked in days. Most things now went to David's place anyway. When she opened the metal box, it was empty, not even a flyer. Curious, she double-checked her online banking, remembering she was expecting a paper statement. Nothing had arrived. The next day, while Stephanie was out, Margaret waited until she left her home office, then tiptoed in. She wasn't proud of it, but something inside her whispered, "Look." On Stephanie's desk, tucked beneath a stack of folders, she found it. A white envelope addressed to Margaret from her bank, unopened. She stared at it for a long time, then carefully took a photo of the front and back. She didn't open it herself. That would be too far. But the message was clear. They weren't just dismissing her, they were controlling her. Margaret stared at the photo on her phone, the envelope from her bank, unopened, hidden on Stephanie's desk. Her chest ached not just from the betrayal, but from the realization that she'd let herself believe she was wanted here. Needed. Loved. That night, after everyone had gone to bed, she powered up her old laptop. It was slow, the kind that hummed like a sleepy cat, but it still worked. She logged into her online banking account, her fingers trembling. Scrolling through the statements, she paused. There it was, a charge for $642 at a high-end spa in the city. Date, last Thursday. She hadn't been to a spa in over a decade. Another charge, $1,185 from a luxury purse boutique. Then one for $379 from a home decor store. Stephanie mentioned once, laughing, "I could never afford anything there unless I won the lottery." But apparently, someone had. Margaret clicked further back. Dozens of transactions, restaurant bills, online orders, beauty subscriptions, all under her name. Or rather, the name on the supplementary credit card she had once opened for David. She had forgotten about it. 5 years ago, when David was just starting out, she'd added him to her credit card in case of emergencies. She remembered walking him through the process at the bank, even signing the forms herself. He promised to use it only when absolutely necessary. Later, he said he'd cut it up. He never did. Her fingers hovered over the screen. She clicked, "View Authorized Users." There it was. David Johnson, card ending in 4482. But then she noticed something. The signature on file for the supplementary card. It didn't match her own. The loop on the G was wrong. The line under her last name, always perfectly straight, was uneven and rushed. A small difference, easy to miss. But not to Margaret. She'd written that name thousands of times. She opened a drawer and pulled out a folder of old tax documents and letters. She scanned her real signature, compared, then scanned again. Her breath caught. Someone had altered her digital signature. She wasn't sure when or how, but someone had done it. The next morning, Margaret waited until Stephanie had left for yoga, and David was working in his home office with headphones on. She opened the mailbox again. Nothing. Later that day, she found Stephanie tossing more mail into the recycling bin. Curious, Margaret waited until the room was empty and sifted through it. She found 3 more letters addressed to her, all from the bank, all unopened. Her stomach turned. She needed help. That night, she called Joanne, her best friend from childhood, now a retired attorney who'd moved 3 states away. Joanne picked up on the second ring. "Margaret, is everything okay?" "I need to ask you something." "Legal." Margaret explained everything, the credit card, the forged signature, the hidden letters, the spa charges, the silence on David's part. Joanne was quiet for a moment. Then, "You still have that house, don't you? The one you gave David?" "I signed it over years ago." "Yes, but didn't you put in a clause? I remember you wanted to make sure it wasn't sold without your say." Margaret rifled through a locked box she had kept in her room. Inside was the original deed. She scanned the fine print. There it was. If at any point the recipient is found to have acted in violation of familial duty, integrity, or respect, the grantor reserves full right to reclaim ownership upon review. She gasped. She'd forgotten about that clause. Joanne had insisted on it. You never know, her friend had said then. People change. And people had. Margaret took photos of the deed, the banking statements, and the altered signature. She compiled them into a folder on her laptop labeled Emergency. But she didn't stop there. She searched property records online, found that the house, her family's home, had recently been listed as collateral for a business loan. A tech finance startup registered under David's name, but Stephanie's email was listed as the main point of contact. A cold weight settled in her stomach. They had used her home, her legacy, to start a company, without telling her, without permission. She printed every document she could, bought a small flash drive, and copied everything twice. One copy she hid beneath her dresser drawer. The other she slipped into a padded envelope and mailed to Joanne. On the front of the envelope, she wrote in careful cursive, "Open only if something happens to me." Then, as the sun dipped behind the house she once believed was a safe haven, Margaret sat at her tiny attic desk, lit a candle, and labeled a new manila folder in bold, dark ink, "If I disappear." Margaret thought she had seen the worst of it. The forged signature, the stolen mail, the misuse of her credit. But what she found next chilled her in a way that no cold attic ever could. Late one night, while scrolling through David's laptop, left carelessly open while he showered, she followed a trail from his bookmarks. It led to a dashboard labeled Coin Nest Ventures, LLC. She clicked through spreadsheets and investment logs. Her heart pounded as she realized what she was looking at. The business they'd used her house to secure was a cryptocurrency venture, high risk, volatile. The charts showed steep drops. Notes beside them told the story without needing much interpretation. Q2 loss, $47,300. Stephanie to secure second funding. Liquidate backup assets. Margaret's hand shook. She checked the funding source line. Personal credit, MJ, Margaret.Johnson.card 4482. They had used her credit card to cover the company's losses. She sat back in the chair, stunned. It wasn't just careless spending anymore. It was theft. Calculated, repeated, and worse, coordinated. The next day, while pretending to clean the shared office, Margaret checked the drawer where Stephanie kept her documents. She found minutes from a business meeting. They weren't even hidden. She scanned the pages until one line hit her square in the chest. MJ authorized second-round financing, signed. Below it was her name, her full name, only it wasn't her handwriting. She looked at the M, too rounded. The G didn't have her usual tail, a forged signature on a legal document. Stephanie had signed in her place at a business investor meeting. And David? He had been in attendance. His name was listed on the attendance sheet. No objections recorded, no asterisks, no hesitation. He knew. He had watched his wife impersonate his mother and said nothing. When he came home that evening, Margaret stood in the kitchen holding a warm towel. "David," she said gently, "if you knew something was wrong, something serious, would you say something, even if it made things uncomfortable?" David rubbed his eyes. "What are you talking about, Mom?" She looked down. "Nothing." He kissed her forehead and walked away. "You're worrying too much again." That night, Margaret didn't sleep. She stayed awake at her window, looking out at the backyard that used to hold a swing David loved as a boy. She remembered pushing him for hours, his laughter filling the air. Now she felt like she was the one being pushed toward the edge. 2 days later, she overheard something that sealed it all. Stephanie was in her office, door ajar. Margaret passed by on her way to collect laundry when she heard her voice, low and clipped. "As soon as we move her to Ridgewood, we can start the process. The house will be in my name by then. No contest." A pause. "No, David's fine with it. He doesn't want a scene. She's old. It'll be easy." Ridgewood. It was a senior care facility. One Stephanie had mentioned weeks ago, casually, like someone discussing vacation spots. "Just saying," she had said then, "some people do better with a little structure." Margaret backed away from the door, her heart hammering. They were planning to move her out, institutionalize her, so they could take the house, take the name, and erase her completely. She had to act. That evening, while everyone was out, Margaret began. She called the credit card company and canceled all supplementary users. Then she froze all activity on the card. The representative offered to send confirmation via mail or email. "Both," Margaret said. Next, she emailed her bank with an official request to block any further use of her identity on any business or property accounts. She photocopied the house deed again, printed 5 copies of every bank statement showing unauthorized charges, attached the forged meeting notes. She made a list of all the lies, all the receipts, all the people involved. Then she placed them in a large manila folder labeled "For Review," and just in case, she made another flash drive copy and mailed it to Joanne. Finally, she prepared for what she called the dinner, a final performance. Margaret invited David and Stephanie to a farewell dinner on Friday evening. "I just want to talk," she said. Stephanie smirked. "What's the occasion?" "You'll see." In the days leading up to it, Margaret placed an old phone, still functional, on top of the bookshelf in the hallway, camera facing Stephanie's office. She hit record and waited. It captured everything. On Thursday evening, Stephanie made another call, this time more confident. "Everything's in motion," she said. "Once we move the old bat, the deed transfers. No need for probate. David signed the power of attorney. She won't fight." Margaret played the clip back again and again. No emotion, no hesitation. That night, she prepared her final plan. Margaret hadn't cooked a full dinner in weeks. But that Friday evening, the house was filled with the familiar scent of rosemary chicken, roasted carrots, and garlic bread just the way David loved it as a child. She hummed softly as she basted the chicken, her hands calm, her mind razor sharp. The dining table was set simply, white plates, folded napkins, a small bouquet of daisies. David came downstairs first, adjusting his collar. "Smells like childhood," he said, smiling faintly. Margaret smiled back. "Just thought we could share one last dinner as a family." Stephanie appeared moments later, phone in hand as usual. "Is this a celebration or something?" "You could say that," Margaret replied. "Please sit." They ate in relative silence. David complimented the food. Stephanie barely touched hers, sipping wine instead. Margaret waited, timing everything perfectly. When the plates were cleared and she brought out the dessert, an apple pie still warm, she didn't place it on the table right away. Instead, she set down a thick envelope. "Before we have dessert," she said, sliding it toward David, "I think you should read this." David frowned. "What's this?" "Just some things I've gathered," she said, "before it's too late." David opened the envelope slowly. Inside were printed bank statements with highlighted transactions, credit card charges, the official confirmation of the supplementary card's cancellation, a copy of the deed clause giving Margaret legal rights to revoke ownership, and at the very bottom, a USB drive. "What is this?" Stephanie asked, her tone shifting. Margaret turned to her. "It's a recording of your call with your lawyer about Ridgewood, about taking the deed, about how I'd be easy to move." Stephanie's face lost all color. David sat frozen, scanning the documents. "Mom, I didn't know." "Yes, you did," Margaret said softly. "You were there when she signed my name. You didn't stop her. You were at the meeting where they recorded it as approved. You watched your wife forge your mother's consent, and you said nothing." David looked at the floor. "I didn't want to fight. I thought maybe it wasn't that serious." "Not that serious?" Margaret's voice rose, not loud but sharp. "Using my credit to fund a failing company? Selling my house from under me? Planning to institutionalize me without my consent?" Stephanie slammed her wine glass down. You have no proof. Margaret smiled coldly. I have more than proof. I have motive, method, and confession, all recorded, and it's already backed up. David tried to speak, but Margaret cut him off. I won't be your victim. I'm your mother, not your plan B. She stood slowly, placing her hands on the back of her chair. I've already spoken to a lawyer. As of Monday morning, I will be exercising the deed clause. The house will return to my name. Your accounts are frozen. Your startup, funded with stolen money, will be reported. Stephanie's face twisted. You can't do that. You're not even stable. Margaret laughed, a low, tired sound. That's what you were going to say at Ridgewood, wasn't it? That I was confused, frail, easy to dismiss. Stephanie lunged for the folder, but David grabbed her wrist. Stop, he said, his voice hollow. You're really siding with her? Stephanie hissed. David stared blankly at the table. I don't even know what I'm doing anymore. Margaret walked to the sideboard and pulled out a final envelope. She held it up. This is a signed report ready to be submitted to the fraud division of the bank. Copies have been mailed to my attorney and my friend Joanne. If anything happens to me, anything at all, it'll be sent automatically. Stephanie's mouth opened, then closed again. Margaret stepped back from the table. I'll give you until Sunday to pack. After that, I'll call the sheriff myself. She left the room without another word, the pie untouched on the counter. Behind her, the silence was thicker than ever. The silence in the house was different now, not heavy or cold, but clean. It was the kind of quiet Margaret hadn't felt in years, a stillness that didn't carry judgment or whispers behind doors. David and Stephanie had moved out 2 days after the dinner. No arguments, no dramatics, just boxes, a moving truck, and eyes that no longer dared to meet hers. Margaret had the locks changed the same afternoon. The deed was legally transferred back to her within a week. Her lawyer didn't need to fight hard. Once presented with evidence of identity fraud, unauthorized credit use, and attempted coercion, the bank's legal team had no choice but to cooperate. Stephanie's employer, upon discovering her involvement in forged financial documents, terminated her immediately. The startup collapsed shortly after. Investors pulled out, unwilling to associate with a scandal. David, caught between legal liability and shame, moved into a small apartment downtown. He called Margaret twice, left a message each time. Mom, I'm sorry, I was stupid. Please, just let me explain. She never called back. It wasn't anger, it wasn't revenge, it was peace. She finally had it. Margaret spent the next few weeks repairing the parts of the home that had been neglected. She painted the front porch herself, replanted the old garden, rehung the swing in the backyard. The attic was cleared, aired out, and turned into a reading room with soft chairs and bookshelves filled with poetry and piano scores. She didn't fill the silence with bitterness. Instead, she filled it with music and laughter, though not her own. On Monday afternoons, her small living room transformed into a music class for neighborhood kids whose parents couldn't afford private lessons. She taught piano basics, helped with reading sheet music, and told stories between scales. Did you know Chopin used to play for people in salons this small? She'd say, tapping the dusty keys. The children adored her. Parents brought cookies. Someone offered to fix her leaky sink. Another built a bench for the front yard. Her world, once reduced to shadows in an attic, began to bloom again. One rainy afternoon, as she sipped tea on the porch, Joanne called, "You're becoming famous, you know." Margaret laughed. "Whatever do you mean?" "Your blog. That post you made last week, it's been shared over 8,000 times. People are commenting from everywhere." Margaret had started writing on a whim, just thoughts at first, reflections. Then eventually her story, raw, detailed, honest. She titled the main post, "I didn't fight my son, I fought the silence." In it, she wrote, "I didn't raise my son to become someone who would hurt me, but I also didn't raise myself to accept being used. I didn't fight my family, I fought to be seen, to be respected. I didn't want revenge, I wanted truth." Her words resonated with thousands. Women wrote to her, sharing similar stories. Mothers erased, dismissed, manipulated under the guise of care. "I don't want to be rescued," she wrote in a follow-up post. "I want to be remembered as someone who didn't disappear just because she got old." A publishing agent reached out. There were talks of turning her story into a book. Margaret smiled, then politely declined. "I've already said what I needed to say." Still, she kept writing. One morning, she received a small envelope in the mail. Inside was a photograph, a little boy playing a grand piano, beaming with pride. On the back, "Ben, age 7. He's taking lessons now. He asks about you." There was no return address, but she knew. She folded the photo, placed it gently in the top drawer of her desk, and whispered, "Maybe someday." Because forgiveness was a door that opened inward, and hers was not locked, just not ready. As the seasons changed, the house became warmer, not in temperature, but in presence. Margaret no longer walked with hesitation. No one restricted her movements. No one hushed her voice. She was home, and she had earned every corner of it. Her final blog entry, posted 1 year after the housewarming party that had nearly broken her, was short but unforgettable. "Don't confuse kindness with weakness. And never forget, mothers remember everything,